Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be discussing potential Warlock specs for DPS during the pre-patch for TBC. As you probably know, these new anniversary realms are transitioning to TBC in the coming months, and before we can start getting to level 70, start the TBC content, we're going to have at least a couple weeks, hopefully more than like two. I would love for a very long pre-patch, but either way, we'll have at least a few weeks of having TBC talents, but we're still level 60, and presumably you're doing like Nex and AQ40 and stuff, right? Pre-patch is an interesting time because it comes around very seldom, and it does not stay for long. So no one's really an expert on pre-patch level 60 talents because it happens so infrequently. And I'm, of course, no expert, but I'm doing this video to kind of theorycraft and kind of look at the talents and try to determine what might be best. And in doing so, I found 4 different specs that I think could all be viable. I'm going to talk about each spec and just going to go from there. I have 2 fire specs and 2 shadow specs. Before I go into depth about the talents, I briefly want to mention why you may be playing fire or shadow. As a rule for Warlock, shadow will outperform fire, provided your raid is set up to let you succeed. If you have shadow weaving and like Curse of Shadows, then one of the shadow specs will definitely be better for you on boss encounters. However, if you're in a raid with less than 3 Warlocks and no Shadow Priest, if you don't have Curse of Shadows or Shadow Weaving, it is probably better for you to look at a Fire spec, because you will certainly have mages putting up Improved Scorch, and if you have at least 2 Warlocks, you'll have a Curse of Elements for the fire damage. With that said, Curse of Elements changes in TBC to where you no longer need Curse of Shadows as well. Curse of Elements includes fire and shadow, so you're covered. Though in TBC you'll probably have plenty of Warlocks anyway, just because Warlocks are so strong. But I don't believe that changes until you get the new rank of like Curse of Elements, right? Past level 60. So I'm pretty sure that at level 60 during the pre-patch, if you want Curse of Shadows for the increased shadow damage, you will still need to have 3 Warlocks in your raid. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. With that said, whether you play Fire or Shadow, I have 2 different specs for each playstyle, and I'm going to talk about them. So first, let's start with this first spec. So this is a DS Ruin build, very similar to what you're probably already playing if you're playing DS Ruin. Pretty much the exact same thing. I'm not going to go into depth about every single point, but I'm going to point out talents that change and kind of talk about why I picked them. So this is 7 points in Affliction, 21 in Demo, and 23 in Destro. And the idea of this spec is you sacrifice Succubus for the increased shadow damage, and you're pretty much just keeping up corruption and spamming Shadow Bolt. But let's look at the talents. So for the demo tree, really everything is pretty much filler just to get Demonic Sacrifice, really. But you take a Demonic Embrace for the stamina, prove Hellstones unchanged, prove Voidwalkers unchanged. Fell Intellect and Fell Stamina get a slight improvement in TBC to where it also increases your character's mana or health. Only 1% per point, so it's not huge. But that is an upgrade from Classic. And we get our Feldom, Master Summoner, and then just like 1 point in Demonic Aegis. We just need to put a point somewhere. You could put it in wherever you feel like. But really, none of these points really matter too much. It's just you want Demonic Sacrifice. For the Affliction tree, we have our Instant Corruption and Improved Life Tap. And then for the Destro tree, you know it, you love it. Improved Shadow Bolt, very strong talent. This is a shadow spec, so this is really important. Bane is very important. This remains unchanged. Devastation for the crit remains unchanged. You want to get your Shadow Burn. Destructive Reach gets an improvement. It still gives you the 20% range, but it also gives you 10% less threat on your destruction spells, which is nice for sure. On this spec, I took Intensity. This gets an upgrade from Classic. In Classic, it was 70% pushback reduction on your just Hellfire, Rain of Fire, and Soulfire, I believe. Whereas now it is every destruction spell, which is nice. I like this talent for like Hellfire on AoE. If you're doing that, if a couple mobs start hitting you, without this talent, it is more difficult to Hellfire effectively. Improved Searing Pain, we have 2 out of 3. This gets an improvement. In Classic, it was a 5-point talent, giving you 2% crit per point. However, in TBC, it is 4% for the first point and then 3% for the next 2 points. So that you can still get that 10% like you did in Classic, but with only 3 points instead of 5. You could take a point out of Intensity and max out Improved Searing Pain if you'd like. But for this spec, it's really a shadow spec, so you're not using Searing Pain a whole lot anyways. I prefer Intensity personally, just for like Hellfire AoE. And then of course Ruin, the double damage on crits is very nice. This is pretty much identical to the DS Ruin build that you're familiar with. The only really changes is that a few talents have improved, such as these minor improvements in the Demo tree and minor improvements for improved Searing Pain and stuff like that. This is pretty much the exact same thing that you're already familiar with. But I think it's potentially one of your better options for pre-patch. But now let's move on to another spec, which is similar. This is a DS Emberstorm. The difference is that you do not take points in Affliction in order to have more points for the Destruction tree to get these fire talents, because this is a fire spec. So if you're in a raid situation where it warrants you playing fire, you might be looking at a spec like this. The Demo tree is exactly the same. I'm not going to go over that again. But we no longer have Instant Corruption or Improved Life Tap, but instead we are gaining some other things. So we have our Improved Shadow Bolt. Since this is a fire spec, you could just take Cataclysm instead for the slight reduction in mana cost. But I like having Improved Shadow Bolt just for this rare circumstances that you may be casting Shadow Bolt. I just think it's nice to have, and I don't think Cataclysm is very impactful. But if you really are trying to min-max and you're just casting fire, you could potentially swap Improved Shadow Bolt for Cataclysm. Personal preference, but I like to have Improved Shadow Bolt. Anyways, moving down, we still get Bane, Devastation, Shadow Burn, Destructive Reach. I have 3 out of 3 Improved Searing Pain this time because Searing Pain is our main filler, so I definitely want as much crit as I could possibly get. I no longer have Intensity, not because it loses value for playing fire when compared to Shadow, but that there are points that are more impactful further down the tree for fire, such as Improved Immolate and Emberstorm. So I don't have Intensity with this spec. I instead max out Improved Searing Pain, and then with the leftover points that I'm gaining from not taking anything in Affliction, I get 3 out of 5 Improved Immolate. This is, if you're playing a fire spec, Immolate is pretty important. It basically just takes the place of your Corruption as your dot that you're maintaining. And then 5 out of 5 Emberstorm. In Classic, Emberstorm was just 2% fire damage per point for 5 points, 10% fire. But now it also gives you haste on Incinerate, which is very nice. However, you will not have Incinerate at level 60. So as far as pre-patch is concerned, you can kind of ignore that half of the talent, but still 10% fire damage is very nice. This, along Demonic Sacrifice Imp, will give you a total of 25% increased fire damage. Start to be able to do some pretty good damage with your Searing Pain and Immolate. Unfortunately, we are one talent point short of also getting like a conflag, but we'll get into that later. There is a spec that goes deeper into destro. Yeah, this is pretty much what you're playing already potentially in Classic. It's DS Emberstorm. It's a good fire spec for sure. Moving on. Another spec that you're probably familiar with potentially is SM Ruin. Um, a few talent points change or get improved or whatnot, but let's get into it. First, let's go over destruction because it's pretty much what we've always been doing. Proof Shadow Bolt, Bane, Devastation, Shadow Burn, the 2 Intensity, 2 Destructive Reach, and Ruin. When compared to the first spec I went over, this has 23 points in Destro, which is why I get 2 out of 3 Proof Searing Pain. But with this SM Ruin build, you only get 21 points, so you're not getting any Proof Searing Pain. But this is the Shadow spec anyways, so it's not that big a deal. But yeah, basically your cookie cutter Destro stuff to get 21 points for Ruin. Nothing in Demo. Then Affliction, we get our Instant Corruption, Improve Life Tap. Then a lot of these other points are kind of useless. You can really put them wherever you feel like, but I just chose some hit for your Affliction spells, but if you're in Axe gear, you probably don't really need this talent, right? It isn't doing much for you. Improve Drain Soul. A little bit less threat on your Affliction spells, which is nice, and some mana return if you're killing something that you're draining its soul. I'm not sure if it's exactly like in Classic, where you have to be the one to get the killing blow, but either way, it's a okay talent. We're really just trying to get further down the tree. Amplify Curse is useful if you are somehow using a damaging curse, but you probably aren't. But where else are you gonna put the point, right? For PvE, a lot of these talents actually kind of suck. Like this one too, Improve Curse of Agony. You probably aren't even using Curse of Agony. You could put points in like Fell Concentration or whatever, but you're not really using any of those for PvE either, as a rule. You're really just Corruption and Shadow Bolt. But yeah, a lot of these talents kind of suck, but as we move down to this row and further, it gets a little bit better. With Grim Reach for the range. Nightfall is always very nice, giving you that instant cast Shadow Bolt on your Corruption ticks. New talent, Empowered Corruption, is pretty nice. Just increases the damage of it. 36% more bonus spell damage. So that's pretty nice. Then we take Siphon Life. You use this seldom, but there are some times where the healing is a little useful. And then, of course, our Shadow Mastery, the namesake of the talent, SM Ruin. 10% shadow damage. Not quite as powerful as Demonic Sacrifice Succubus as far as shadow damage is concerned. This gives you 15, this gives you 10. But you do get things like Empowered Corruption, Nightfall, Grim Reach, that kind of stuff to even the playing field as far as shadow specs are concerned. Then we have a couple more points. I just put 2 out of 5 Shadow Embrace, reducing the damage of the boss. Not too bad. You could put more points in this if you're trying to help your raid out. But yeah, this is an example of a SM Ruin build. Very similar to what you may be playing in Classic. So far, the first 3 I talked about are specs that you already could be playing in Classic. This DS Ruin, DS Emberstorm, SM Ruin. Now let's talk about something that's kind of brand new, which I think is exciting. And that is like a deep destro build. Why is it? Anyways. So this is another fire spec, but instead of getting Demonic Sacrifice, spending 21 points to get that increased fire damage, we are just putting a lot of stuff in the destruction tree. We still get our instant cast Corruption Proof Life Tap, just because there's not so many things in here that we need to where we kind of have extra points. So I would say, even though Corruption isn't a big part of your rotation as a fire spec, Still nice to have an instant cast ability when you're on the move. And improved life tap is nice too. But let's talk about the destruction tree. Same argument can be made for Cataclysm, because this is a fire spec, you're not really casting Shadow Bolt, you don't really need improved Shadow Bolt, but I like to take improved Shadow Bolt, even as a fire warlock. Bane, of course, Devastation, Shadow Burn, Destructive Reach, improved Searing Pain, all this stuff we've seen before. We're not taking Intensity, although you could. You could take points out of something else to get Intensity. It is up to you. But things you really do want is improved Immolate, very nice. Emberstorm, that 10% fire damage. We get Conflag, very nice ability. Instant cast fire damage on any target that has Immolate, very nice. A little bit mana hungry if you're using it on cooldown, but that's something for you to determine how often you should be using it. Whether you're using it on cooldown for the most DPS, or oftentimes if I'm playing a Conflag spec, you're just using the Conflag at the very end of the Immolate to get that big burst, and then you recast the new Immolate, right? But let's look at some new talents. Shadow and Flame is very nice. Get rid of this ad. Your Shadow Bolt and Incinerate gain an additional 20% of your bonus spell damage. Well, this is primarily a fire spec, so you would think Incinerate, but you don't have Incinerate at level 60. So this is kind of a dead talent, unfortunately, even though it sounds pretty good. But then we get Shadow Fury, a very nice ability. An AoE stun that does a lot of damage as well. In TBC, you use this on single target just for the damage. It's a very good ability. And if you're thinking about like your Nax, like the Spider Wing, all those spiders or whatever, I think you could definitely find some good use for Shadow Fury in Nax. You also get these talents. They're not too crazy, but they're nice. Backlash is nice. It's just 1% crit per point, just like Devastation. So that's an extra 3% crit. And you have a chance to get instant cast Shadow Bolts when you're meleeed. So that's like a reason I would take Improved Shadow Bolt over Cataclysm, right? Even though you're primarily casting fire, like let's say you're hellfiring all the spiders in Nax, and you don't have a warrior doing a lip AoE shout. Then a couple spiders might beat on you. Then you get your backlash proc, and then boom, instant cast Shadow Bolt. Pretty good. And then Soul Leech, also niche. It's a chance to heal you on like your abilities, right? Not too crazy, but for something like Saffron, it could be nice to get some passive healing. But yeah, these are the 4 specs I kind of cooked up. 2 fire ones, 2 shadow ones. It's unfortunate that if we had Incinerate, this would be a lot more exciting, but we don't. So you're kind of 3 out of 4 of these specs you already may be playing, right? DS Ruin, DS Emberstorm, SM Ruin. It's pretty much the exact same specs you're already playing, except it's just slightly improved with a few modifications to the talents. But I think this destro spec could be pretty fun. Do I think that this deep destro will outperform SM Ruin, DS Ruin, or DS Emberstorm? It's hard to say. When comparing this to like DS Emberstorm, what are the changes, right? So you lose the 15% fire damage, but you gain more points than improved Immolate. You gain Conflag and Shadow Fury, 3 more crit, potentially some instant cast, some heals. You get your improved Corruption, improved life tap. Do those things warrant? Do those equal out to 15% fire damage? It's hard to say. I plan to try out probably all 4 of these specs during pre-patch just to kind of see which one does the best. But my guess, what I foresee happening, is if you have Shadow Weaving or Curse of Shadows, that the Shadow specs will outperform the Fire specs, whether that be SM Ruin or DS Ruin. I think both SM Ruin and DS Ruin will sim very, very similarly, as they already do in Classic. But SM Ruin does get this new talent, Improved Empowered Corruption, which is nice, whereas the DS Ruin doesn't really get anything new. Nothing in Demonology is increasing your DPS. Whereas a couple things in Affliction do improve, such as this Empowered Corruption. But but if you don't have Shadow Weaving, you don't have Curse of Shadows, but you do have Mages for Improved Scorch, and you have Curse of Elements, then you're probably looking at one of these Fire specs. If somebody put a gun to my head and tried to make me say which one I think will be better, honestly, I'm leaning towards just good old DS Emberstorm. I think that the 15% fire damage overall will probably outperform Deep Destro. But Deep Destro is very fun. So as soon as pre-patch comes, the first spec I'm probably going to raid with is this Deep Destro spec. I'm excited to use Conflag and Shadow Fury and all that. But yeah, that's the video. I want to say again, I'm not a professional on pre-patch talents, but I just wanted to make this video to Theorycraft. You may notice, before I sign off, an elephant in the room. I did not talk about Deep Demonology Warlock, like with a Felguard, right? Demo Warlock can certainly do good damage, but I'm just going to be honest, I've never played it, and I don't really know much about it, so I'm not going to comment on it. Fair enough. But yeah, if you're a Demo Warlock enjoyer, I'm sure you could probably do pretty good damage with your Felguard. But yeah, that's the video. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.